When I finished War and Remembrance, I had spent 10 years on the Winds of War and War and Remembrance. I was kind of casting about, trying to look for something to do. And I thought nothing would ever satisfy me again, that I couldn't find anything that I would want to make. I wasn't going to try and top myself, because I knew that was impossible, and everything seemed so paltry to me that I... And MGM came to me just as long after Jim Aubrey's days. A friend of mine was running a television operation over there, David Gerber, and wanted me to come over there and do my television stuff there and try to make a feature arrangement. But all along, NBC had been coming to me when I was editing War and Remembrance. Brandon Tartikoff calling me in London at weird hours. They had the writer's strike. I wanted to do Dark Shadows. Take all the old Dark Shadows scripts and put them on. I said, Brandon, leave me alone. At the same time, I know what he was trying to do was to disrupt me so that I take my mind off of War and Remembrance, because they all knew that this was really going to hurt him, right? And he kept after me, and he kept after me, he kept after me, and then I kept saying no, 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 and then last thing in the world I wanted to even talk about was that. So now when I go over to MGM and make a deal to go over to MGM, he was still after me, except now they wanted to do it as a nighttime show and do it properly, do it as an hour and a whole thing. And the last thing in the world I wanted to do was Dark Shadows. I didn't want to go back into that world again. I had just had it. So I said to him, if you allow me to use the stories that I used before, and we started from the beginning with the girl arriving, that might be interesting, because I could do it in a way that I always envisioned being able to do it but couldn't do it. And they gave me a 13-week commitment to 13 hours. And I said, okay. So what I wanted to do was to do the Dark Shadows that everybody remembered, but wasn't really the way they remembered it. When you're a kid and you see a movie, your memory of it is totally different than it actually was. It's bigger, it's grander, it's more glossy. Then you go back and see it many years later and you go, wow, what's that? But I wanted this to be the way everybody imagined they remembered Dark Shadows.
Totally got it.
That was the plan, and we did it, and we made it happen, and we built the Great Hall. We took an entire soundstage. I mean, this was the Great Hall. This wasn't the little 9 steps in a little cramped corridor. This was a great hall that looked like Grand Central Station, and the look of it. I put my style into it. I shoot in a certain way. All the directors that worked with me on it all understood my style, and we all shot that way. It was lit brilliantly. I mean, it really came off magnificently, and it was exactly the image that lived in the imagination that never existed. This show was different in a number of ways than the original one. And Ben Cross brought something different than Jonathan brought to it. We can't say it's better than what Jonathan brought to it, but it was different. And what he brought to it was this serious danger. He was a very dangerous person, and yet he was able to embody the tortured soul of that whole quality of... He wasn't as vulnerable, but he was as tortured, and the women loved him as much, and he had a great sexuality about him. Mm-hmm. That was the difference between those two. When it opened on the Sunday night, coincided exactly with the bombing in the Gulf War. That first couple of weeks was a true nightmare. We were being preempted. We were right up against the war. We were running against Norman Schwarzwalder, or Schwarzkopf. half the show would be preempted in the East, and it would run in the West, and then they would do a make good, and nobody would know. Directly up against the goal. Yet it still did great, and it attained the audience that these people really loved. It was absolutely fascinating. They got all the kids, they got all the people 18 to 34 that they wanted. Women were kids, the whole business, and they were supposed to renew it, and then they canceled it, and I had mixed emotions on it. I already was getting into the syndrome of, oh boy, I have to keep this up again, and I can't do anything else. And they made a big mistake. They made a big mistake when they canceled. They came back to me a couple of years later and they said, we made a terrible mistake. We'd like to do it again. We want to put this thing back on the air again. So we went through a whole development process, and then all the people involved got fired, and it never went back on. It feels very strange to be the creator of Dark Shadows, because everywhere I go, and people I bump into them all, it doesn't make any difference where it is. When they hear Dark Shadows, or they say, oh, you're the guy that did Dark Shadow. And they all have the exact same line. I used to run home every day from school to see Dark Shadows. Same, it's like somebody wrote that line for them. I don't know, it feels, I always said I'll probably be remembered for Dark Shadows and not the things that I really cared about, which were the great epics that I made. Dark Shadows will be the thing that will be on my gravestone. But I love Dark Shadows. And yeah, I guess it's terrific to have somehow created something that will live forever. It's not like brain surgery, but it's hopefully it will live forever.